Perry Smith was born October 27th, 1928, in Huntington, Nevada, a now abandoned community in Elko County. His parents, Florius Julia Flo Buskin and John Tex Smith, were rodeo performers. Sources conflicted on whether Smith was a mixed Dutch and Shoshone ancestry are Irish Cherokee. The family moved to John U, Alaska in 1929, where the elder Smith distilled bootleg whiskey for a living. Perry's father abused his wife and four children, and in 1935, his wife left him, taking the children with her to San Francisco, California. Perry and his siblings were raised initially with their alcoholic mother, Flo. After Flo died from choking on her own vomit when Perry was 13, he and his siblings were placed in a Catholic orphanage where nuns abused him physically and emotionally for his lifelong problem of chronic bedwetting. A result of malnutrition, he was placed in a Salvation Army orphanage, where one of the caretakers allegedly tried to drown him. In his adolescence, Perry reunited with his father Tex, and together they lived an in, inuit existence across much of the western United States. Perry also spent time in different juvenile detention homes for joining a street gang and becoming involved in petty crime. In the mid 1960s, Tex moved to Cold Springs, Nevada, where he lived. Okay, so two of Perry's siblings died by suicide as young adults, and his other sister just eliminated contact with him. So at 16, Perry joined the United States Merchant Marine. He joined the United States Army in 1948. He served in the Korean War, and he had an honorable discharge in 1952. Um, he was employed as a car painter. With one of his first paychecks, Smith bought a motorcycle. While riding, he lost control of the bike due to adverse weather conditions. Perry nearly died in the accident and spent 6 months in Bellingham Hospital. Became severe injuries he sustained. His legs were permanently disabled, and he suffered chronic leg pains for the rest of his life. To help control the pain, Perry consumed an excessive amount of aspirin. So, Perry and Richard both get in car accidents and are permanently disfigured for the rest of their lives. What a coincidence. You can't make this up. Perry was sentenced to 5 to 10 years for burglary and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution after robbing a chandelier sales barn in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and escaping from jail. Perry was on the run for over a year before eventually being caught in New York City and rejailed. He served his sentence from March 13th, 1956 until July 6th, 1959 at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing, Kansas, where he first met Richard Hickok. Smith was eventually paroled, and the pair later resumed their acquaintance upon Richard's release in November 1959. Richard Richard allegedly wrote to Perry, imploring him to violate his parole by returning to Kansas and assist Richard with a robbery he had been planning. So that's the robbery where that Floyd guy said that um, in the last episode with Richard that Mr. Clutter had a safe. Perry claimed that his return was initially motivated not by meeting with Richard, by the chance to unite with one former inmate, Willie J., with whom he had developed a especially close bond while in prison. Bush! Yeah. Perry soon discovered, however, that when he arrived in the Kansas City area, just a few hours after Willie J had left the East Coast. Perry met with Richard, and almost immediately the two set out to work out Richard's plan. Driving west to Holcomb, he entered the Clutter home through the unlocked door late in the evening, November 14th, 1959, where upon the bound, gagged, and then murdered the four family members present: Herbert Clutter and his wife Bonnie, and their children Nancy 16 and Kenyon 15. Richard testified that he had gotten the idea to rob the Clutters after being told by former cellmate Floyd Wells, who had worked as a farmhand for the Clutters, that there was a safe in the family's house containing $10,000. When they invaded the house, however, they discovered that there was no such safe. Perry and Dick, why would they call him Dick? But okay, Perry and Richard only ended up with about $50 in cash, a pair of binoculars, and a Zenith transistor radio that belonged to Kenyon Clutter. After 6 weeks at large, mostly spent idly roaming the country, Perry and Richard were captured in Las Vegas, Nevada on December 30th, 1959, following extensive manhunt extended into Mexico. Perry admitted to cutting the throat of the father, Herbert Clutter, of both shooting Herbert and Kane Clutter in the head with a shotgun at close range. Records show a dispute as to which of the two shot the women, Bonnie and Nancy Clutter. Clutter? Is it Clutter or Clutter? Alvin Dewey, chief investigator of the Clutter family murders, testified that the trial that Richard insisted in his confession that Perry performed all four killings. Perry, however, first confessed that Richard killed the women, but refused to sign his confession and later claimed to have shot them himself, although Perry's revised confession coincided with Richard's initial statement. Both Perry and Richard refused to testify in court, leading to a lack of an official record detailing who killed the women. While Smith had only a grade, while Perry only had a grade school education, he maintained a strong interest in art, literature, and music. His rough past regarding his family and abusive childhood led him to be somewhat distant from people. He had extensively, and during this time on death row, wrote poems and painted pictures for other inmates from photos of their family members. During the research for his novel In Cold Blood, Truman Capote extensively interviewed Perry and eventually befriended him. Perry and Richard were executed by hanging on April 14th, 1965. They requested a last meal of shrimp. No, it says spiced shrimp, French fries, garlic bread, ice cream, strawberries with whipped cream. Perry was hanged second, dying at 1:19 a.m. Perry was also the last non-voluntary execution during the pre-Foreman years. Non-voluntary? Nearly 50 years after the executions, the bodies of the killers were exhumed from Mount Munichi Cemetery in Lansing, as authorities hope to solve a 53-year-old cold case using DNA. Perry and Richard had originally been questioned about the December 19th, 1959 shooting murder of Osprey, Florida, of Cliff and Christine Walker and two young children. Evidence indicated that they had spent time just a few miles from the Walker crime scene after the Cluter murders. A polygraph administrator at the time of their arrest cleared them from the murders, but in modern polygraph standards, their test results are not considered valid. Murders, but the modern, okay. On December 19th, 2012, officials in Kansas exhumed the bodies of Perry and Richard. and retrieved bone fragments and compared their DNA to semen found on the pants of Christine Walker. In 2013, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office announced that they were unable to find matched DNA of Perry and Richard and the samples of the Walker family murders. Only partial DNA could be retrieved, possibly due to degradation of the DNA samples over the decades or contamination and storage, making the outcome one of uncertainty, neither providing or disproving the involvement of Perry or Richard. Investigators have stated that Perry and Richard still remain the most valuable suspects. However, in 2013, other investigators working on the case expressed doubt about this notion, stating that DNA tests performed by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation have excluded Richard and Perry.